Hello and welcome back to Philosophy and Humor. And this week we're going to take a look at Humor and Ethics, Module 8. Hopefully you've had a good break and ready to come back and start studying and thinking about humor in new and interesting ways. The first half of the course, we kind of looked at theories that allow us to understand what humor is. Superiority theories, incongruity, relief, and play, and these kinds of things. Carnival humor, for example. But we did learn that humor does have some issues. It has some landmines, we'll call them, because there are associations with these feelings of superiority that we may have over other people that we're making fun of. Humor does deal with taboo subjects, as we found out last week or a couple of weeks ago with relief theory. And that kind of raises ethical questions, right? Questions about our responsibility as either the tellers of jokes or the listeners of jokes. So on both ends, both the sender and the receiver have ethical responsibilities in terms of the content of the joke. Now, having said that, humor does have positive qualities. There's no doubt about that. We've talked about how it may or may not be an emotion. It works as a social lubricant. It also is able to kind of break the ice at parties or some kind of get together and kind of establish a warmer decorum between those individuals. But what's happening with humor is that it's playing with and against social norms that all of us grow up learning about because we all belong to one culture or another, maybe not a community. That's not a definition that in our society in North America we're really clear about, but certainly our culture will say we have norms and expectations and mores that humor plays with, right? It plays with those particular expectations. Such as this poster here that I found I think I found it on Facebook quite a few years ago. There was a whole spate of shootings, of school shootings, which is awful. Of course it's awful. But someone, I don't know who it was, I wish I had some kind of credit for it, but this was a poster that came out very shortly after. And you have to admit, it's kind of funny, okay? Why is it funny? Well, because if you stop to look at what kinds of guns they are, therein lies the humor. So you look at it and go, okay, approved guns for teachers. This is awful. Then you start looking at it. One's got a silencer on it. Another one is an old-fashioned pistol. Then you've got, biology. Who knows what that thing is? Shop, auto shop. It's an oil gun, etc. Some thought went into it, and we recognize the thought that goes into this humorous statement about approved guns for teachers. The sad thing is, it reflects a really negative situation. But someone was able to find humor in that particular situation there. So, our first clip of the day, Chris Rock on police brutality. What I want you to think about is what I've just said, right? That the positive value of humor has its due to the social function that it performs. And so humor plays with, right, plays against also social norms that really constitute our culture. And of course, our subculture as well. And in this particular case, Chris Rock is addressing a serious issue. But again, in the same ways that poster I just showed you plays with a serious topic in we'll say a lighthearted way, or at least in an amusing, humorous way, and we recognize the humor. Chris Rock does the same thing with, of all things, police brutality. So have a look at that clip. The link is down below, as they do right down there. So they're all there, so click on that. And when you're done, come on back for the next slide. So John Morreall, that we've talked about already, he gave us some really interesting ideas about the relationship between humor and religion, humor and philosophy, the comic hero versus the tragic hero. So there's a lot of really interesting things to say about comedy and humor. So he talks about the positive and negative aspects of humor. And he says, look, you can not like humor for the following reasons, right? You can say, look, I object to all forms of humor on the following moral grounds, right? That it's associated with lying. Okay, it's also associated with negative play, word play, physical play, sort of subversions of norms and expectations. A lot of humor has to do with physical pleasure and sexual desire. And really, at the worst, there's a kind of a general sense of just being irresponsible, right? It's just being crazy and stupid because, well, that's what humorous things are usually about. So if we were to stop and think about what Morreall says, he says, okay, look, that's true about humor. But if we stop and think a bit more, we realize that, okay, the notion of lying can really extend all the way to any kind of literary venture. Fiction. Fiction is lying. Or unacceptable forms of behavior. There's all kinds of unacceptable forms of behavior, like bullying, being a snob, being just ignorant and rude. It's got nothing to do with humor, but it's something that I wouldn't like on moral grounds either. And the fact that comic deviations really are the kind of bread and butter of what humor is all about, because we are allowed, because Cicero said so about 2,000 years ago, said, hey, it's okay to stretch the truth, because it's in the stretching of the truth that something becomes funny. So those comic deviations from the truth, it's different from lying because, one, we know the person is creating a joke or a comedic situation, and two, this is not the way we would typically expect these people to be talking. So when we're thinking about humor and we're thinking about laughter, what we are often doing is laughing at exaggeration. So we're laughing at the way reality is distorted or twisted in some particular way, not too far. Remember Aristotle, right? That sliding scale. We're twisting it just enough for a comic effect, but not so far that we're causing grief and terror in the individuals. So we're laughing at exaggerations just enough for it to be funny. So if that's the case, we can make the claim that comic incongruity is both true and false, right? There is a sense of falsity because it is distorted or exaggerated, but at the same time, it's based on something that is truthful. And in the same way, the Chris Rock piece has to do with something very real, sadly, unfortunately, very real. It's the way in which he twists it around to find the comic gold that's within that situation. So comic incongruity is both false and true. So if it's false, it may be critical about something. It's asking us to think about it in a slightly different way. Again, not to the degree that it causes fear or harm, just enough for it to be funny. Now, this is the clip that for a couple of years was not even available on YouTube. I actually had to park it in my hard drive and bring it up every time I'd show it in class. But Real Housewives of ISIS was a spoof. It's, first of all, not a real show, but there were housewives of ISIS. I mean, these young women actually existed. So here we are taking a real idea. So far, we've talked about police brutality, school shootings. Now we're talking about ISIS. But you see where I'm going with this? Like, we're taking serious subjects that could be, on ethically shaky ground, we might say. But because it's done through a comedic lens, a humorous lens, we're seeing the same topic but from a different perspective. So when we're laughing at something that is humorous, we're laughing at the exaggeration. We recognize the truth in that statement. We recognize the truth in that clip. But we're also laughing at the way in which it is distorted. So we're able to do that and hold, again, those two thoughts in our head, that comic incongruity. It's both false because it is exaggerated, but it is true because it is based on something real. So have a chance finally to see this once again. And again, there's another clip we're going to see here. Please remember, we're making fun of ISIS. We're not making fun of women or housewives. We're making fun of ISIS. We need to make that distinction very clear. And this is where certain jokes that might kind of cross the line and end up on, ethically shaky ground. We need to be clear on what it is we're making fun of. So the Real Housewives of ISIS, have a look at it and come on back in just a moment. Okay, so for John Morreall, humor promotes intellectual and moral virtues. So humor, and we've talked about this, it allows us to think outside the box, to be creative, to bend the rules a little bit, exaggerate and kind of play with ideas and kind of twist them around. So humor can stimulate original and creative thinking. That's one of its positive traits. It can also free us from the conventional ways in which we think about. We can be irrational, illogical, sometimes immoral, but we want to try to be at least illogical and irrational. So if we're thinking humorously, quite often we're thinking creatively as well. We're doing the proverbial what if. what if this happened? What if we threw that in there? And what if this other, and off we go. So when we're thinking humorously, we're thinking critically, creatively, which those things alone make humor still very positive. And so not only is it a way in which for us to think kind of outside of our typical forms of behavior, it actually is morally virtuous because it achieves a kind of self-transcendence. Now, what does that mean? When we are being funny, when we're hopefully being humorous, we can possibly experience what Thomas Hobbes called that sudden glory. Remember that aha moment. Not that we're necessarily laughing at someone else. We're laughing at ourselves. We're laughing at ourselves doing something silly and wrong for 5 or 10 minutes or maybe a week, who knows. And then suddenly someone comes along and shows us otherwise. And we laugh, right? We step outside of ourselves just for a moment. We laugh at our previous behavior. So humor, not only does it allow us to think creatively and constructively, it also allows us to step outside ourselves to gain kind of a different perspective. Because when we are asking that what if question, one of those questions could be, what if I was someone else? What if I were experiencing the world through the eyes of another person? And if you can do that, you are very likely a sympathetic person. You're certainly an empathetic person because you can empathize with another person. So someone with a sense of humor typically is someone that can be sympathetic and empathetic to the plight of others, right? Can understand their pain and somehow is able to transcend themselves, step out of their worldview, and just for a moment to see the world from another point of view. So it is actually a kind of a good thing. Bo Burnham, someone that I just heard of a couple of years ago, a student had mentioned them in one of their essays and said, oh, sure, check him out. He's pretty funny. So I did. And I think his stuff is very funny. Very deadpan, very droll, but it works. And here we have a good example of someone that can self-transcend, can step outside of his own world and laugh at himself. So there is this ability of being kind of humbled by the situation that you're in. And that can be also a positive trait because humor is creative, constructive. It's a positive trait because it gives us a sense of humility. We can think outside the box. We can think, sort of the what if positions. And all of those things, in the end, kind of make us a better person. So this is Bo Burnham. Lower your expectations if you want love. And a good idea or example, an idea of humility at work, and you can dance to it. Okay, so humor and ethics and ethnic humor now. Ethnic humor, we need to be careful because it doesn't take much for us to cross that line and become not clever or funny, but in fact rude and stupid and obnoxious. So in ethnic humor, we are now dealing with sort of a different set of circumstances. The ethical question is still there for sure, but at the same time, we need to look at it to see how it works. And the way it works is the following. Humor, in this case, when we're talking about ethnic humor, it offers solidarity, right, to people who sometimes are downtrodden, feel oppressed. They want to sort of have someone watch their back, right? And so when you group together with other individuals, one of the ways you do it is through humor. You find a common enemy, right, or a common problem, a common issue. So humor can offer solidarity to people that feel oppressed because all of you together share the same dilemma, the same situation. So you can cope, and that's what humor does. It's another positive trait. Now, the most common example that we can think of is Jewish humor, a really good example of what's called coping humor, because it is a way in which that group can identify with each other because they have a common issue, but it also is representative of that whole oppressed group, right, as a whole. So that ability to see the world through the eyes of another, an ethnic group, for example, will make you think twice about saying something that is, in your mind, very funny when in fact it isn't. Put it this way: if you can take what is, ethnic humor, and you can put literally any ethnic group into that joke, it probably is a funny joke. But when the joke is absolutely contingent, it is specifically about these kinds of people, that's a lot less funny. That's bordering on racism. So we need to be really careful when we talk about coping humor and how it works, because it does bring a group together and allows them to laugh and point to a common situation or enemy. But when we are the ones that are doing, when I say we, those that are entitled or privileged, we need to be very careful about what we're doing with those kinds of jokes. So humor can bring people together. It can provide social solidarity, but it can also divide that group over and against another group. So when we are doing that, what we're actually doing is we are, on the one hand, grouping together, and we're identifying with this bunch of folks here. But the way in which we do it is at the expense of another group of people. So one community bonds over humor at the expense of the other community. And so we need to be very careful as to how far we wish to push that communal group on the one hand and the subject of the humorous material on the other. Because yes, it will bring individual groups together, but it can also divide them because of the subject matter. So the ethics of humor, that's for this reason that it does focus on ethnic and sexist humor, because really, at the end of the day, what it's trying to do is to privilege one group over the other. And so when you're doing that, you are sometimes bordering on sexist or racist humor, because the humor groups one group of people together, brings those people together. Could be men, it could be a group of individuals that are identifiable, but it's humor at the expense of another group. So again, we need to be very careful. Now, Christy Davies, the gentleman here, Christy Davies has written extensively on ethnic humor and ethnic jokes, and he looks at it from a really interesting perspective, because he does kind of boil it down to two types of jokes. And this is why I mentioned just a few moments ago, if you have, let's say, the proverbial Newfie joke that we used to hear all the time in Canada. Like, Newfie jokes were very funny, and the best thing was I've worked with lots of people from Newfoundland, fantastic people, love them to death. They're often the ones who tell Newfie jokes because they think they're really funny. But ultimately, those kinds of ethnic jokes fall under one of two different categories. And we're going to look at the first one here. What Christy Davies says is the most common form of ethnic joke is what's called the stupid ethnic joke. And this is a joke made at the expense of a person that is stupid, vain, greedy, gullible, ruthless, deficient in some dimension of the personality, we'll say. So just because it is ethnic, it is primarily, notice the hyphenation, stupid ethnic, right? It's primarily a stupid person, right? A gullible, ignorant person, not rude, but ignorant as in not knowing. So it is jokes about stupid people that happen to be, closed or masked under ethnic humor. Essentially, really what we're talking about is what are called moron jokes, right? Jokes about really stupid people. Now, here's another clip. I don't know if you ever heard of this movie called Four Lions, but of all things, it is a comedy about terrorism. Okay, so watch it carefully. And when you go to YouTube, you can read through some of the comments. Most people don't. I love reading through those because I just like to see what people think. But as one commentator says, I'm Muslim and I think this is hilarious. They're making fun of terrorists, not Muslims. Keep that in mind, because if you were to watch the same clip and change let's say the nationality of those individuals and say, okay, they're not ISIS, they're not some terror, Middle Eastern terrorist organization, but we're, the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers or whatever other knucklehead right-wing group that happens to be out there, and the same material is going on. Okay, now you've identified the source of the humor. It's not the Proud Boys, it's not ISIS, it's just terrorism. These people are complete knuckleheads. It's actually quite funny. I used to just play it was kind of the trailer for the movie, but I found this clip, which is actually part of the movie itself. So the clip is called, "Can I have 12 bottles of bleach, please?" Have a look at it and just think about the stupid ethnic joke, right? The humor is at the expense of people who are stupid, vain, gullible, greedy, or deficient in some way. These guys are essentially morons. It doesn't matter who they are. They're first and foremost morons. So have a look at the clip and come on back in a couple minutes. Okay, so we can see here that ethnic jokes and their targets really run the range of the entire world. So, for example, America, there were Polish jokes. Depending on what time of the century, what often happened was that the next group that would come along that were immigrants, there were waves of immigrants. Those individuals tended to be the ones that would be made fun of. And the idea in America, strange as it is, in America, you would make fun of the next group of people that showed up on your shores for whatever reason. And you were supposed to just kind of take it, because the reward, and I put that in quotations, the reward was that once you assimilate into America, when the next group of people show up, you get to make fun of them. Now, is that a good thing? Not really, because you have to sit and take, bad jokes and just be ill-treated for a while. But the reward somehow is that you get to do that to someone else. That's the part I'm not sure about. But the point here with this slide is you can see no matter where you are in the world, there will always going to be those targets that are considered ethnic. Like if you see down the first list, Canada, Newfies, in Finland, the Karelians, in France, it's the Belgians, in India, it's the Sikhs, in Iran, it's the Turks, on and on. Now, these can change more or less. The point of this is that every country has its own group of people that it tends to make fun of. And whether or not in America, that group gets to make fun of another group, that's beside the point. What we're trying to point out here is this is not a North American thing. This is a global thing. No matter where you are, there will always be a group of people that are being made fun of for one reason or another. Now, what's going on here? We're thinking about stupid ethnic jokes here. And Davies writes, ethnic jokes about stupidity inevitably flourish in modern societies based on competition, rational calculation, and technical innovation. For stupidity means failure and the downfall of self and all others alike. So he says that in ethnic humor around the world. The reason why stupid ethnic jokes are funny and are common and very popular is because it is a reflection of the very opposite of what that culture is about. North American culture, absolutely about competition. It's about money. It's about wealth and power and prestige and having the bigger car and the fastest iPhone. So when you're not up to speed, you're left behind. And when you're left behind, you kind of get made fun of. So that's kind of the way Davies is describing this situation here. Ethnic jokes are about stupidity because it's something that our culture doesn't like to see in other people. So what's going on here in terms of trying to bring these groups together? So what's happening is this. The message of the stupid ethnic jokes is that our community, right, we're of course more clever and more competitive and just generally better than your group, right? Your group of dummies and stupid, gullible people. The problem with that, though, is now you identify that stupidity with a particular group. So again, we need to be very careful. If the joke can be exchanged, if one ethnic group can be exchanged for another, and the joke is still funny, then there is some merit. But again, as I pointed out before, if the joke is absolutely specific to being, a certain type of person, that gets a lot more problematic. So that's where you can make that distinction. So what we're really doing is just like we identify, the solidarity of one group, in this case, a group of intelligent people will say, we laugh at those that aren't as clever as us. It's always the other group, the other people. We are more clever than you. We are better than you. There is the divisive part. So on the one hand, it brings people together and groups them together, but it divides them from other groups. So we need to be very careful because the teller and the listener must recognize those norms regarding intelligence, that the moron doesn't recognize, doesn't know about, doesn't care. So we on the one hand are holding in our heads the idea that yes, intelligence is valued, it's important, it's what's going to get us where we need to be. So those individuals who are moronic or stupid or just gullible probably aren't going to buy into that message of intelligence is good. So they belong to that other group. So when we belong to that other group, we think that we're just the best, we're as good as sliced bread, blah, 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 whatever you want to say. But what if it happens that someone else is looking at us, such as this clip here? Australians watch American television commercials. Now, we in Canada going, hey, it ain't me, ain't talking about me. Okay, no, they're not. They're talking about American television. But this is a good example of when the tables are turned. And many of the clips in this presentation likes to turn the tables. And that's kind of what this whole thing is about. So the notion of a stupid ethnic jokes in our community, making us better than the other, it's the other group, not us, that is stupid. This is a good example. So these are Australians watching American television commercials, and the comments that they make about them, very funny, because we're, of course, siding with the Australians, right? Clearly not the Americans. But you can see when you turn the tables, you all of a sudden identify with, yeah, I guess we look kind of pretty idiotic, especially with what they're pointing out to us. So have a look at that clip and then come on back in just a moment. Okay, so we talked about the stupid ethnic joke. Now we have the other kind, which is the canny ethnic joke. Now, what is canny? Or you say something is uncanny. Well, in this case, if someone is canny, they're being shrewd, they're calculating, they're stingy, they're underhanded, they're crafty, they're kind of sly. All those things that are qualities that we would not want to have associated with us. We don't want to be known as a shrewd, calculating, crafty, kind of stingy person. These are negative qualities that we would not want to have associated with us. We want somebody else, right? It's somebody else that has those problems. Just like stupidity isn't something we want to be, accused of being, or just dumb or gullible. The same thing. We don't want to be called shrewd and calculating. So once again, in the same way that stupid ethnic jokes work because it's about stupid people, the same thing here, canny ethnic jokes. So yes, it is the opposite of stupid, but it ain't no compliment. That's for damn sure. So canny ethnic jokes, people are sly, they're devious, they're underhanded. They do a lot of just really despicable things that, because they're presented in a humorous way, we can see what it is that's being made fun of, because again, we carry in our heads that which should be, right? We should be behaving, more upright, or at least morally on the higher ground. So canny jokes, just like stupidity, is something really ultimately we fear in ourselves. So we kind of group together, say, well, these people are kind of shrewd and sly, or they're really stupid and gullible and moronic, but it's something we would not want to have associated with us. That's why we say it's them, right? It's always that us and them kind of relationship. As we move further along in this course, that issue of us and them becomes much more problematic. Okay, so in the same way that intelligence is valued in our society also, values success, but you shouldn't be underhanded in trying to achieve it. Those people that we know that have been cheating and are shrewd and underhanded, no, we don't want to be like those people, because, we're saying, look, like fair is fair here. Like, we've got to behave properly. Now, Marx Brothers, one of my favorites, still after all these years, I guess Groucho Marx, probably the penultimate comedian of the canny ethnic joke. Now we have with the Marx Brothers different types of humor, or humorous characters, but Groucho Marx, that is really the canny ethnic joke person. So when we watch this, watch his behavior. We're kind of here's where it gets strange. Look at the date, 1935. It's an American film made in 1935 in the middle of the Depression. Okay, so think about that. Think of the context in which this film comes out. As much as Groucho Marx may be canny and being underhanded and sly and devious, is something we shouldn't wish to aspire to, there's something quite remarkable about Groucho Marx in the way he can, he can think on his feet. He can stick handle really well and always seems to get what he wants. But he does it in a canny, underhanded way. Now, maybe it's not the best example, but it is something that we can look at and go, well, we wouldn't want to be accused of that. But when we see someone that does it so well, there is something almost admirable about what they do. Now, I'll let you decide. But this is Marco Dumont as Mrs. Teasdale and Groucho Marx in this wonderful bit where they meet for dinner. And of course, Groucho just lets her have it. And at the moment poor Margaret Dumont has figured out what's going on, he's already 5 steps ahead of her. So very canny, very shrewd. So have a listen and a watch to A Night at the Opera, and we'll see you back in a moment. Okay, so what we're really saying in terms of these 2 types of characters, the stupid ethnic and the canny ethnic, is these are people that aren't typically sociable, right? Or even generous for that matter. Generous with their time, with their money, their emotions. Everything is filtered through money. Everything's filtered through, the ability to get money, to hold on to money, to get more money, and to spend as little bit of your own as possible, preferably someone else's. But canny jokes, in the same way as stupid jokes, really underscore something we fear in ourselves. We don't want to be considered those types of people. We wouldn't want to be considered gullible, but we also wouldn't want to be considered, devious and underhanded. These are qualities of human beings that we don't want to be associated with, but we certainly go out of our way to make fun of those individuals that are that way. So, jokes about these types of people, whether they're stupid or canny, we need to remember that in the context that we experience them, whether it's watching a Marx Brothers movie or stand-up comedians, the context in which we are hearing these statements is one where we're not expecting the truth, right? We're expecting people to be joking and to be stretching and twisting the truth, again, just enough to be funny, not so much to cause fear and anxiety. So we're expecting people to be joking in that context of a movie or a stand-up routine. And because of that, we have to admit the jokes don't make truth claims about the world, right? That's not what they do. So the problem is, if you were to take every joke as literally the truth, you either have no sense of humor or are so easily offended by absolutely everything that you've essentially lost your sense of humor. So jokes don't talk about literal truths. They twist and turn the truth around just enough so that we can recognize the situation, but also recognize the deviation. So most people understand that to cast a group as, stupid or canny is, first of all, a joke in the context, but at its worst, it's also a stereotype. And that's not what we want to be doing. So when we are laughing at these kinds of jokes, just like I had mentioned a moment ago with the Marx Brothers, we find Groucho almost admirable. We admire what he's doing because he's so good at it. But we wouldn't want to be at the receiving end of someone like Groucho Marx, because we know that the next thing we doing is checking our back pocket and make sure our wallet's still there, or that, if you're a woman, make sure your purse is still there. Like, that's what we're afraid of. So we can admire it when it's well done, but we definitely would not want to have it done to us. So when we are laughing at these jokes, we're never, our laughter is never innocent, right? It's never, it's just a joke, because there is an ethnic or sexist component in it. So when we are doing this, we're doing something that's really interesting. We're sharing a viewpoint, right? A viewpoint about stupidity or canny, shrewd behavior, and we're associating it with a particular ethnic group. So we always have to be careful to the degree to which we are pushing the ethnic part of it more so than the stupid or the canny part of it. Like I said before, if you can replace the type of person you're making fun of, and I don't mean the stupid or canny, but the ethnic origin of that person, and the joke is still funny, likely it's an okay joke because it's not specifically that ethnic group. But if it is, that's racism, and that's not funny. So we're sharing the viewpoint with the speaker, with the listener, or the reader with the writer, and so on. And we're adopting a kind of an attitude however temporary it may be, but we're adopting an attitude towards that, that group that we're making fun of, right? That disparaged group. Now, is sharing a viewpoint or an attitude the same as believing it? That's an interesting question. Okay, let's get to that in a moment. But first, I want you to watch a clip by Shazia Mirza. This is someone that I found on YouTube. And again, you'll notice that many of the clips here, rather than the expectation, I've now turned the tables and I'm letting those groups that are typically the butt of humorous jokes, or quite often not humorous jokes, now they're turning it around and they're getting us to think, us being this privileged white audience, to think about the expectations and their stereotypical thoughts that we have of others. So that's what makes the jokes work. And this particular stand-up routine, as a Muslim woman, works even better because there is a very acute awareness of who she is and the perceptions that others have of her. And that's where the comedic gold is spun. So those expectations are literally turned on their heads over and over again. So jokes don't make truth claims about the world, and she certainly is not. And so if we were to take them literally, right, we wouldn't be humorous. We wouldn't have a sense of humor. We'd be more worried about, virtually everything. So when we're making fun of someone, remember this is within the confines of a stand-up routine, and Ms. Mirza is presenting this material as comedy. She's not a sociology teacher. She's not a history teacher. She's not running for public office. It's a stand-up comedy routine. So have a listen to it and come on back in a moment. Okay, really ultimately, that sharing of an attitude or belief, all we really need to make that joke funny is our imagination. We just simply imagine the situation that's being described to us. But to do that doesn't mean that we necessarily endorse a potentially racist or sexist attitude that the joke, is dealing with, it's referring to. So offensive jokes don't make truth claims, nor do they try to. We need to recognize them as jokes, and that's really what it is. Now, they become problematic, like I've said repeatedly now, that, they are specific to that kind of a person, specific to that ethnic group. That's bordering on racism and sexism. So if we are listening or reading the joke, they don't always have to reflect true reality to be funny. There has to be a slight deviation in order for it to become funny. And so if that's the case, they shouldn't be considered morally objectionable because they're not trying to make truth claims. That's essentially the argument. Now, that's not to say that people are uncomfortable with racist humor. Many people are, and rightly so, because why? Because they tend to deal with racist stereotypes, negative stereotypes. And stereotypes are not wanted. It's not something that we like, because a stereotype, just like a caricature that we talked about a few weeks ago, it reduces an individual, or in certain cases, an entire group, to a particular signifier, like the color of one's hair, or the color of one's skin, or a particular attribute. We now reduce a group of people. The complexity of humanity is overwhelming, and we just take it and down to one or two little characteristics. And typically those characteristics end up dehumanizing those people. When the humor that you are hearing and reading trades with those kinds of stereotypes, that is racist humor. There's no question about it, because the stereotype is very specific to that ethnic group. If you were to try to interchange it and go, let's put, let's put a Polish person in there, or a Jewish person. Now the joke's not funny anymore. No, it isn't, because it's damn well racist. So that's important. So what's happening with jokes, ethnic jokes that start pushing the envelope, is that the more discriminated against that ethnic minority is, the less comfortable we should be in making fun of them. Because the more discriminated they are in real life, right, socially, economically, legally, the more difficult it should be to make fun of them, especially the very group that is, systematically being racist towards them, because we agree to a system under which we live, and if that system is racist, we need to change it. And so if we identify that ethnic group as always being discriminated against for real, not even a twist of reality, for real, then making jokes about them should be more difficult, because it becomes a way in which the joke reinforces and normalizes that discrimination. If we don't call attention to it, for example, Chris Rock, police brutality. Chris Rock, clearly a black person, a person of color, talking about other people of color in the US, and is able to find the comedy in a situation that otherwise has been extremely harmful to his community. So if we were to look at that, and let's say it was a white person that made that, who ran that clip. No, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. It would be very uncomfortable. And ultimately, we wouldn't be really sure what it was we were looking at. What's being made fun of? Yeah, white people also get attacked by the police, but it seems to be particularly nasty with people of color. So if those groups are discriminated against, making jokes about them should not be something that's done with great amount of joy and comfort. Those assumptions should be much more problematic. Now, Aamer Rahman, again, another brilliant comic who kind of trades with these ideas, these stereotypes that we have been discussing now. And once again, turns the tables on us, because when we think the more discriminated against the ethnic minority, the less comfortable we should be about making fun of them. So Aamer Rahman does exactly that, makes us feel uncomfortable about racism. And does it in a really smart and clever way. These routines are really well thought out. It's literature. It really is. So have a look at Reverse Racism, Aamer Rahman, and come back after, and we'll continue this. So we're talking about humor and ethics and ethnic jokes in particular, and these are the ones that really become morally problematic and ethically problematic, because they deal ultimately with negative and reactionary stereotypes, especially negative stereotypes. And when the joke is reinforcing the very social structures that keep those people in an inferior discriminatory position, that's not humor. I would like to really find someone that can take a situation as awful as that and spin comedic gold out of it. It really takes a particular talent to do that. But when a joke is reinforcing those social and economic and legal structures that discriminate in the first place, and that is in fact the content of the joke, that's problematic. That should make us uncomfortable. So we might partake in ethnic humor without being racist, because we have an imagination and we are simply sharing an attitude for just a short period of time, and we think the what if, but that should be it. But there's some people that like racist humor simply because they're racist. They just love the fact that it is particularly awful. And I think they especially like when it makes other people uncomfortable. So some people find racist jokes upsetting for the very reason that others enjoy repeating them. They are found offensive because we find two people repeating a really offensive racist joke, and we're offended by the fact that these two clowns think this is funny. And this is something that really should be upsetting. And this now sort of comes back to Freud with the relief theory that we talked about a few weeks ago. The humor can be aggressive precisely because it is associated, or it's associated with fulfillment of repressed desires. Now, there are some people that may be repressed racists and enjoy telling racist jokes because it's the only way they can express these things. But let's face it, over the last 4 years in America, there has been no repression of racist humor or racist feelings, because there'd been a guy in charge that said, green light, go, say whatever you want. Things are hopefully coming back to normal, I would like to think. I'm a little bit early, but we're on the right track. So joking in this case can be sometimes looked at as a sort of acceptable form of hostility. And some people just simply like telling those jokes because they are nasty. They are either nasty people or they like to make other people uncomfortable. But those jokes are still there because some people are either just plain racists and they think they're funny, or those jokes are make people uncomfortable, and individuals like to say those particular things. And really, when we're talking about this kind of behavior, we're now back to superiority theory, right? because these individuals are laughing at their sense of superiority over others, whoever they may be, through a religious affiliation, a gender, or whatever. So they're laughing at the flaws in other people. And so we need to be very, very careful, because in ethnic humor, people in power laugh at people who, because they are outside that dominant group, don't have power. And part of the sort of celebratory humor is the fact that they aren't sharing power. All they're doing is reinforcing those uneven social hierarchies. And so the social hierarchy of, a group discriminated against economically, socially, legally, and whatever, and the other group that isn't. So if you belong to the group that isn't, just because you do and you aren't discriminated against doesn't give you the right to turn around and crack those kinds of jokes, because you can, but expect to push back. So Aamer Rahman back again, talking about bigots, because he says, bigots should be allowed to talk. Once again, does the same thing, turns the tables, plays with those stereotypes, those caricatures, and does, again, a wonderful job. Because here he's talking about, people in power laugh at people who are outside the dominant group, who don't have power. And therein kind of lies the motor that drives that whole routine. Because here he's talking about reinforcing social hierarchies, but he does it in such a comedic way where he's pushing the envelope that we see the humor in it. He's talking about bigotry, but it's the way in which he does it that makes it rather clever. So have a look at it. We'll see you back in a moment. So Ted Cohen, the last person we're going to look at, says, well, certain topics, ethnic humor, ethical humor, moral problems, he says, okay, some issues we should be very careful of when we are trying to create comedic material. Because he says sometimes just joking about things might be a way of avoiding the seriousness of the situation. So having said that, he does believe that certain things need to be addressed without humor, because we need to be able to confront something head on, not make a joke out of it, and deal with it in the serious manner that it should be taken care of. Now, every time I say this, a student usually will find a clip, sir, I found a joke about death or found a joke about cancer. Eric, a few weeks ago, found a very funny meme of the World Trade Center, the little graph, 2001, nothing. It was funny, but there are not very many of them. And what Cohen is saying is that there are certain subjects that are simply more difficult to render in some humorous kind of way. Because if we start doing this, then we start normalizing looking at, let's say, terrorism or disease in only a humorous way, when clearly that's not the case. So certain subjects can or should be off limits, but it cannot be, if we are humorous about it, be the only response. We still need to treat this particular issue that we're trying to make some joke out of, in a serious manner that it is, that it should be taken as, I should say. So joking and being humorous is part of the human condition, but it should not be the only way in which we interact with the rest of the world. And yes, some jokes are tasteless and are offensive, and we're making moral judgments about how they fit into our worldview. How far do they twist the truth? How much do they deviate from a real situation? So we need to always consider that, especially when we're making jokes about ethnic groups, because it's just something that really is somewhat of a minefield, especially these days. And so it's a minefield because people are pushing back and saying, hey, I don't like to be treated this way. I don't like to be made fun of. That's why this graph I showed you a short time ago, in America, these people are made fun of. It's changing all the time. And at this particular moment in time, I'm not sure who is the group that is most made fun of. I don't even know if there is one anymore. But ethnic humor, some people think that they are true. They believe the stereotypes. They believe the caricatures, which is not a good thing. And so, although the joke does not have an opinion about the real world, it is the interpretation of that joke that becomes much more problematic. So, Cohen says, there's a certain ambivalence towards nasty ethnic humor. But he says, we should still say that, look, are they moral or immoral? Well, a lot will depend on how much we believe them to be true. They can be nasty. They could also be very funny. And so people who are offended by a particular joke, have a right to say so, but they have to be also wary that making a claim about objectionable jokes are also not funny, in the sense that, is the joke in and of itself funny? Again, if we replaced one ethnic group with another, but the content of the joke was otherwise the same, would it still be funny? If it is, it's probably not as nasty as some people think. But if it cannot be changed, yeah, that's racism. So our last clip here, Aziz Ansari. If you look at the date, this is a SNL monologue, January 22nd, 2017. That's about 4,000 years ago, I think, in dog years maybe. But this is a clip of Aziz Ansari coming on to SNL just a few days after Trump was sworn in, because it's always on the 20th, because the day before is my birthday, on the 20th, and he was sworn in, and everybody just sort of took a deep breath and held it for 4 years. And so when we are talking about ethnic humor, and Aziz Ansari does make fun of himself, but the tone starts to change, right? He starts talking about other people and other people who are afraid. And what's remarkable is he says, hey, everything's going to be okay. I think we're going to be all right. We're going to come through this. And so that was 4 years ago, give or take a month. Remarkable that, Ansari was able to calm everybody down and still make, a few digs at himself. But what he was saying, was it objectionable? Some people that voted for Trump, people who vote for Trump probably don't watch SNL. People who don't vote for Trump probably don't watch SNL either. I don't know your take on it, but over the last 4 years, they have stepped up their game and become funnier. The next couple of years, let's see what happens. But Aziz Ansari, SNL monologue, January 22nd, 2017, only 2 days after Trump was brought into office. And Ansari deals with some of these racial issues that he knew were going to come up. So have a look at it, and I'll see you back in a moment. Okay, so to wrap up here, to claim that an ethnic joke is not funny because it is offensive is an avoidance of a much larger problem, namely that some people simply have negative feelings about other social groups, regardless of the existence of racist humor. There are certain people that just, are offended by other groups, humor or not. That's just who they are. They are simply racists. And by the same token, people that are super offended need to maybe stop and ask themselves, why am I offended? And maybe the worst version of that is you're offended on behalf of another person, right? Or on behalf of another group. When you're doing that, are you not making the situation worse? Like, I'm going to speak on behalf of these people here. Well, I'm sure they can talk on their own. Why don't we ask them? Why don't we ask them and see how they feel? So some people will have negative feelings about other social groups, regardless of humor. There's nothing we can do about it. That's not the fault of a joke. The joke simply reinforces what they're already thinking. And there's not really a whole lot that we can do at that point, because it's simply the way that they're thinking. So John Morreall and Cohen, they both appreciate humor and the fact that it does have, generally speaking, positive qualities, all the ones that I've mentioned, creative outlets, thinking outside the box, social lubricant, and all the rest of it, because ultimately they do bring people together. Humor does have has the ability to create solidarity between people. We can joke about a common situation, a common enemy, a common problem, a common issue of some sort, and that solidarity is often expressed in opposition to another group, which does not necessarily make the joke offensive. What it does do is it brings solidarity together with one group. The issue becomes, what is the relationship otherwise of that group that it feels, more solid, and the humor at the expense of the other group. That's where it becomes an issue. Because if the other group is disparaged, all the time and discriminated against, it's not humor. But if you can have a common, enemy, let's say Jewish humor about Nazis, not a problem, right? It's pretty cut and dry. But other situations aren't so cut and dry. So humor and laughter are social activities. They are linked to our sense of community, our sense of responsibility, our sense of humanity, our sense of what is right and wrong. And humor twists just a little bit what is considered right and wrong. To the degree in which it twists it too far, that's up to you and I to decide. And if it goes too far, that's when it now borders on racism or sexism. So that's essentially the class. We'll see each other on Monday at noon. I know we've had a break, which is really nice. So hopefully we're going to catch up. And in the meantime, I'm going to continue marking I think the remaining tests. There's maybe half a dozen left, but hopefully by Monday, all that'll be done. So take care, and we'll see you on Monday.